Hi, I'm Neil Nobel, editor-at-large of The Prickly Pear, and welcome to the Cactus Patch. That's thepricklypear.org. The Prickly Pear, one word. Be sure to put us in your browser and save us. Our guest today is Justin Danhof. He is the General Counsel for the National Center for Public Policy Research and is director of their Free Enterprise Project. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Appreciate the time.
Could you tell us just briefly a little bit about yourself, your own evolution, and how you got to be with the National Center and what the National Center does?
Sure, Neeland. I live in Maryland outside of Washington, D.C., with my wife and two daughters. And what happened is I was in law school. I had studied business in undergrad and I was in law school. And I spent all of 4 minutes in a white shoe law firm and realized that's just not the place for me. Someone with conservative and traditional values, that wasn't going to work out. So a friend gave me a list, actually. He said, these are some think tanks in Washington, D.C. that I'm familiar with. You should try and work at one of these. I think you're going to find that you're going to fit in better and you're going to have a lot more impact. And that friend, I owe him all the favors in the world because that's how I found the National Center for Public Policy Research. It's a think tank in Washington, D.C. It's been on the Hill since 1982. It was founded by the late, great Amy Ridenour. She founded it in 1982. And whenever we would butt heads, she would remind me that, Justin, I founded the organization in 1982. You were born in 1982. So ended any disputes, not that we ever had any big ones with that discussion. And Amy founded the organization with a really great mission. When people hear the word think tank, they generally think of, oh, just some white papers largely on economic issues that nobody's ever going to read. They're just going to go to the corner of a desk until they get pushed off one day, right? Amy didn't want that to be us. She wanted us to be a do tank, is what she called it. And so she had two little subsets of that mission. First was we always remain small so we can be nimble and be quick to react and out front. So we're not stayed in that regard. And the second was really smart. She said, wherever we find the conservative voice being the quietest, we want to fill that void. And so that leads us to the Free Enterprise Project. A little more than a decade ago, we looked out at the landscape of corporate America and we just didn't understand what we were seeing.
Yeah.
When it came to large publicly traded companies, we were wondering, why are they lurching, running, in some cases sprinting to the political left? And at the time, these issues fell under the banner of corporate social responsibility. And today that's shifted. That's shifted to something called ESG. That's
You wanted to
environment,
that for our,
social,
yeah.
yeah, environment, social, and governance issues. And we just wondered, again, like a decade ago, why is this happening? So we just started researching it. And we found that there was this kind of tripart takeover of corporate America that was going on. It was a top-down board takeover. It was a bottom-up employee takeover. And the outside in is what we started working on. And we noticed that there was activist groups, and not just extreme type activist groups, but financial activist groups. And there was dozens and dozens and dozens of them that were engaging as shareholders. They would invest in these companies to try and alter their behavior. And they were becoming wildly successful. And so, what's one concrete example of that? Well, healthcare. In 1993 and 1994, the biggest policy debates in America were over Hillary care, right? Well, AHIP, the largest group of insurers, and pharma, the largest group of pharmaceutical companies, they teamed up to stop Hillary care in its tracks. I know Newt Gingrich likes to take all the credit for it, but there was more than Newt involved in stopping Hillary care. Well, fast forward to 2009 and 2010, and Obamacare was the biggest debate in the land, right? AHIP and pharma had switched sides. They were now all on board. Now, part of it is because they were carving themselves bailouts, right? And things like that. But there was a dynamic shift. And so all of those commercials you saw promoting Obamacare with the doctors in the white coats, pharma paid for all of those, right? So while Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama were gaslighting everyone saying, we're fighting for you against the big insurers and the big pharmaceutical companies, they were writing the legislation. So, we just stepped in and just on this array of ESG issues, we started doing the exact thing the left was doing, just from the complete opposite perspective. So we started engaging as shareholders and pushing back and saying ESG has nothing to do with the bottom line. ESG is just social engineering through corporate America where the left can't achieve things legislatively and politically. So let's take a concrete example of what that looks like. Right now, the NASDAQ
Yeah, I saw that.
is asking permission from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is their regulatory body, to kick any company off its exchange, kick them off, unperson them, like George Orwell might say. Um, if they don't diversify their boards in the way that NASDAQ wants. And what they're asking for is you must have one board seat for a woman. And the next one's great. It must be for an underrepresented minority or a member of the LGBTQ plus slash queer community, which they don't even define. Okay. This has nothing to do, hilariously, in NASDAQ's petition to the SEC, they don't even claim that this is to help corporations' bottom lines. And so, why are they doing it this way? Because they can't achieve this through any real legal means, right? It's wildly unconstitutional. So there can't be a law that's passed. Look at California; they're still in litigation over their attempts to pass a law mandating that just a woman be on each company's board, right? So that's why the activists engage in these ways. Shareholder activists, by the way, have been filing shareholder resolutions on this topic for like the last 7 or 8 years because politics is downstream from culture,
Yeah.
right? So if you can change corporate culture, you don't need to change a law. So,
Well, my background is as a certified financial planner, and I was a portfolio manager. And my job was to talk to clients, find out what their financial goals were, assemble a portfolio of stocks and bonds to achieve an income stream that would achieve their goals, whether it was education, healthcare, their retirement, what have you. And we expect the companies that we hire to do this to be profitable, to pay dividends, to pay interest payments, and to get a return on equity and appreciation for the client so they can survive inflation and so on and so forth. It seems to me this ESG movement fundamentally undermines the purpose of a corporation. And it's a little bit frightening to me because I'm retired, I rely on their income. And if companies are supposed to be less profitable because they're pursuing goals that have nothing to do with the bottom line. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a funny line in the Babylon Bee the other day about conservatives sit down for a relaxing evening of being insulted by every major corporation in America. They were talking about some of the Super Bowl ads. I mean, it's not good business to piss off half of the American public, and perhaps more than half the American public. Well, that affects my bottom line. And for someone to say their stakeholder interests are the same as my shareholder interests is an interesting use of words. And I find it very concerning.
yeah, here's what's happening is engagement. I'm going to pause for that word one more time. Engagement. So corporations offend conservatives with impunity because the initial reaction of conservatives when we see things like, oh, I don't know, let's pick Nike. When they pulled the Betsy Ross tribute shoe off the shelves of companies, where they'd actually already shipped the shoe, by the way, they told companies to take it off the shelf before they could sell it at the behest of Colin Kaepernick. Conservatives went on, Facebook and Twitter and said, "Oh, I'm never buying Nike again." Well, guess what? Their stock price went up, their sales are up because conservatives reflectively claim we're going to boycott. Well, let me tell you two secrets. First, the history of the conservative boycott of corporations is an epic failure. It's never worked once, it's not going to work the next time. That's point number one. And this is the dirty secret. The left doesn't boycott either. When the left sees a company doing something that they don't like, they engage more. They buy more shares in that company so they show up and they have a voice. If you divest from a company because you don't like what you're doing, guess what? They're going to do more of it because now you don't have a voice in the room. And so conservatives, we've sat back for way too long and watched left wing ESG activists really take over because they're the only voice in the room. You know, Facebook and Twitter has been, demonetizing and deplatforming and, shadow banning conservatives for years. Why is it that I'm the only one that shows up to Twitter's shareholder meeting to hound Jack Dorsey about this? Thousands of millions of conservatives should be at that shareholder meeting, right? Millions should show up and demand that Mark Zuckerberg put President Trump back on Facebook and Instagram. But every year, I'm the only one that's there from the center right. So that's the issue. Is these companies are hearing from only one side. So again, the single word is engagement. And you're right to point out stakeholder capitalism. For those who missed it, in August of 2019, this was a stunning moment in time that moved the Overton window dramatically to the left. The Business Roundtable changed their statement of a purpose of a corporation. They said shareholder primacy is no longer what we're about. We're about stakeholder capitalism. And then they gave the long laundry list of interests that they're going to care about under this new stakeholder model. You know what was dead last on that list? The shareholders. The
Wow.
shareholders were literally last in the eyes of the Business Roundtable. And what we're seeing is the Europeanization of American businesses. It's exactly what's happening under Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. You guys really, everyone needs to start paying attention to what the Davos crowd and the World Economic Forum are doing. Brian Moynihan, the Bank of America, is a big actor in this. He's really, really pushing for extra governmental ESG standards on corporations. And it's through the weaponization of money, again, that they're engaging in this process. We've got companies that, for social reasons, cancel their own clients. Think about that.
Yeah, it's it can hardly
Salesforce.
be good for business. It's amazing to me that the thinking. Well, what for our listeners who are saying, yeah, I mean, it's one thing not to buy Nike shoes, which is easy to do. I've done that. I'll never buy another product from the Nike Corporation and the rest of my life. But it is kind of hard to escape from, Amazon and some of these other companies because they have such a dominant uh, place in their particular industries. But this goes beyond boycotting their products. You're talking about joining in shareholder suits and shareholder representation at shareholder meetings and that sort of stuff. How do we assist you in what you're doing?
Sure. So, well, come to nationalcenter.org. First of all, check us out. Reach me on Twitter while I'm still allowed to be there at Danhof Justin. And I can walk you through how to get engaged. One way to engage is super simple, especially for folks that are investors. Vote your proxies when they come in, right? Most individual retail shareholders just take their proxy statements and throw them in the trash.
Yeah.
A lot of the resolutions on those proxies are the reason that companies are moving further to the left. Because if you think the presidential election was rigged, they've got nothing on how the left has rigged the proxy voting process. I'll give you one example. Last year at the Chevron annual shareholder meeting, Chevron, American Energy Company, there was a shareholder proposal from a left-wing group that basically asked the company to align its policies with the Paris Climate Accord. This would mothball Chevron. That proposal got 53% of the vote. It would take a whole long discussion to explain how they've rigged it, but part of what's happened is conservatives aren't showing up. They're not voting. So don't just throw your proxy in the trash, read it. If you don't like what Apple and Google and Amazon teamed up to do to Parler by making it disappear overnight, well, guess what? Al Gore, Al Gore sits on the board of Apple. He gets 99% of the vote every year. Are conservatives voting? Clearly not. Conservatives own Apple, right?
Right.
Vote him out. Susan Rice of Benghazi fame. I don't know if she's come back to the Biden administration, so maybe she has to bow out for conflict of interest. But for years, she's been on Netflix's board, right? So they're promoting their own, and then that's part of the top-down takeover. So vote those board members out that are corrupting corporate culture. Vote against shareholder proposals that are corrupting corporate culture. That's a very easy thing to do. And to help you with that, Last year, we put out during shareholder season for the very first time something we call the Investor Value Voter Guide, which teaches conservatives and religious minded Americans how they can vote their values and gives the specifics. We picked out the worst proposals of the year and the best proposals of the year and showed you where they were and gave you very simple step by step on how to vote them if you were an investor.
Very
And
good.
we're going to put one out again this year. It'll be out in early April. Again, come to nationalcenter.org and we'll educate you on the process. We'll help you through it. If you've got a question on a proxy, call me up. I know all the players on the other side that engage in this. I know their motivations. They have the economic worldview of Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That really needs to be noted. That most of the filers of shareholder resolutions hate the companies they're engaging with because they hate capitalism. They don't want to benefit the bottom line because they want government to control all levers of industry.
That's
So
the other thing that's so bizarre about this to me. It's not just that these companies have gone out of their way to alienate a large portion of their customer base and alienate even a large portion of their shareholders, is that their actions are almost suicidal. They are supporting the causes which would undermine the very system by which they've prospered. And that's hard to explain.
well, in some, Churchill kind of said this best. There's some element of appeasement, right?
Uh,
But an appeaser is someone who feeds a crocodile hoping it's going to eat him last.
so they
You
think
know,
they're buying the graces of the left as the left gains ascendancy.
well, and that's right. But I try, and believe me, I try very hard to get the message through that you can't satiate a mob,
Yeah.
right? That you give them an inch, they're going to come back for a mile, and we see this time and time and time again. And so, let's go back to the first example I talked about, the pharma folks supporting Obamacare. Every single one of those CEOs was gone within 4 years of the large pharmaceutical companies and replaced. They got a golden parachute out the door because in the long run, and they've now admitted as much, they all lied at the time. Obamacare was a step on the road to single payer, which would make the companies obsolete. And so, that's part of the structural problem of corporate America is these CEOs can get away with these um, decisions that in the long run will definitely harm their companies because they're going to be out in the short run with a golden parachute.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of the short termism of American corporations, which is, I think, somewhat damaging to the economy. Well, you mentioned just the nationalcenter.org, the website. That can people sign up and get a newsletter and get alerts from you guys when this stuff's
Yeah.
coming down the pike? How can they engage with you besides just visiting your website?
Yeah, on the website, right at the top, there's a sign up. You'll get our emails. You'll get our alerts and our press releases. We'll let you know what's coming down the pipe. And specifically for those who are investors during shareholder season, which runs from April through about June, which most shareholder meetings are held and votes are cast. Every Monday, we'll be putting out a release with the most important shareholder votes going to a vote during that week and links to click through and vote. We make it super simple. We don't overpopulate it. We only put like 4 or 5 resolutions. And if you're an investor in those companies, those are the ones to target that week. So yeah, look there. We're a 501c3 too. So if you want to support the one group right of center that's engaging as investors in this process, tax deductible donation would be wonderful, and you can earmark it for the Free Enterprise Project. And it would be greatly appreciated because look, if we put up a pie chart of the left, the number of groups on the left that engage in shareholder activism and us, you wouldn't even see our sliver. So we'd love to expand to buy up shares in more companies because look, the companies that are still good today, they're turning bad because of these ESG initiatives and resolutions. So we need to be engaged in the fight.
Yeah, I see even now exchange traded funds, ETFs that just have ESG companies in them, and this whole thing has really gained a great deal of momentum. And now we see, you know, business interests basically turn against conservatives, against the Republican Party, refuse to fund them, publicly admonish them. They've made their bed with the left, and it's boy, you wonder why you support the free enterprise system when you have companies like that doing what they're doing. But I wonder if the are we gravitating towards fascism? I mean, technically, fascism, as I remember my political economy, is allowed the private ownership of companies and shareholders, but basically they were directed by the state. And those companies, you think of the Krupp Corporation, was basically united with the state. You saw this in Mussolini's Italy. Are
Well, you
we?
see, yeah, you see it in today's, the CCP, the Communist, Party.
Yes,
Look at what Apple does, for example, in China. When the Hong Kong freedom fighters were exchanging news and information on the App Store, the Communist Party told Apple to take down their news communication apps. So Apple did. That's acting as an arm of the government. So when, Kamala Harris and others scream that we don't want Parler anymore because that's the social media site that's, competing with Facebook and Twitter, and conservatives are talking amongst each other, well, Apple took it off its app store. That was the first move that was taken. Then Google took it off their store. And then Amazon kicked them off the web. That kind of seems very similar, doesn't it?
it does. It seems like instead of importing free enterprise, exporting it to China, we've imported their system here.
Yeah, that's right. And let's look at the reverse example, right? When President Trump was in office and he issued his first order on travel and immigration, what happened? Amazon literally lent out its lawyer to fight that in court. Amazon, what interest do they have? Right? And all of these other companies rose up in arms against it as well and funded the lawsuits that caused the president to have to go through three iterations before one finally passed legal muster in the courts. Right?
Right.
So they're acting as an opposition party, literally, when a conservative is holding the highest office in the land, but they're acting as an arm of the government when the left takes control. That's very scary. And it's happening in real time, folks.
Yeah. Well, this has really been a very interesting and somewhat scary discussion. And I hope our listeners, particularly those who are shareholders, will take note of this and start paying attention to their proxies. Do you ever bunch a bunch of, shall we say, conservative shareholders together in any kind of action against these companies?
I think we should. I think the time is right. Conservatives, for the first time this year, have woken up and realized what's going on, and we know that because of the polling data. So the previous year, Gallup comes out with their annual poll. 57% of conservatives said they supported big business, corporate America. That dropped in 2020 to 31%, the lowest it's ever been. So conservatives saw something in 2020. They saw this corporate wokeism. They saw Amazon and Gatorade and others funding Black Lives Matter as Black Lives Matter protesters were burning city after city after city. So conservatives are this is the time because they finally understood it. We've been doing this for like a decade plus, often feeling like a lone voice in the wilderness, but we're not alone anymore. Now grassroots Americans have realized that corporations are teaming up with the state against our values, against our beliefs. And so, yeah, the time is right to take action because look, the left already built the model. Again, everything we do at the Free Enterprise Project, we just stole it from the left and engage in the same way that they do. So all we have to do is approximate their army. And I always put this spin on it. If the left could figure it out, why can't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I hope our viewers and listeners will take heed, and we will intend to run some of your stuff in the Prickly Pear on a regular basis, and we hope they will be in contact with you. And I hope you and I can chat again soon. I think you're working in an area that's absolutely vital. And to your credit, you're the only one doing it.
Thank you, Neelan. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.